Welcome, and thank you for joining us for the Heat Beneath Our Feet webinar, a webinar series that will accompany this year's WGA Chairman Initiative selected by Colorado Governor Jared Polis to explore the development and deployment of geothermal energy. My name is Stephen Emmon, and I'm the Energy Policy Advisor for Western Governors Association. Since last August, WGA has been conducting workshops and tours throughout the West and had the opportunity to see how geothermal resources can provide heating and cooling to buildings. In Grand Junction, Colorado, we saw how Colorado Mesa University was saving $1.5 million each year after installing their GeoExchange system. In Idaho, we were able to see how the city of Boise is providing heating and cooling to the Idaho State Capitol with the nation's oldest and largest geothermal heating district. On today's webinar, we'll be diving further into the heating and cooling applications of geothermal resources. From residential to commercial buildings, ground source heat pumps are a proven technology that can save consumers money and provide a heating source that is low carbon. Before going any further, I'd like to take a moment to recognize our sponsors who are listed at the beginning of this webinar. Their support is making our work on this initiative possible. Today, we're joined by several guests who are experts in the field of geothermal heating and cooling. First, I'll introduce Heather Deese, the Director of Policy and Regulatory Affairs for Dandelion Energy. Next, we have Jeff Hammond, the Executive Director for the International Ground Source Heat Pump Association, or IGSPA. We're also joined by Ryan Dougherty, the President of GeoExchange. And finally, we have Terry Proffer, the Geothermal Manager for Major Geothermal. A couple housekeeping items before we get started. Throughout the webinar, if you have any questions for the Q&A portion at the end, please submit them to the Q&A box below. If you'd like to rewatch any portion of this webinar, it'll be posted on WGA's website at westgov.org when we finish. You can also catch up on any of the past episodes of the Heat Beneath Our Feet webinar. To start off our presenters, I'll be handing the mic over to Heather Deese from Dandelion Energy. Heather, could you tell us a little bit more about what Dandelion is doing?
Absolutely. Thank you, Steve. Can you hear me okay?
We sure can.
Great. I'm just going to share my screen here. And can you see those slides okay?
Yep.
Awesome. So thanks. Yeah, it's great to be here. As Steve mentioned, I'm with Dandelion Energy, and we are a residential ground source heat pump installation company. Just to start out with, I wanted to put up this fantastic graphic that our National Renewable Energy Lab, NREL, released a couple months ago now, which I'm a big fan of. Some of you may have seen this featured in previous webinars, but this just sort of lays out all the different types of technologies, and I just wanted to highlight the geothermal heat pumps piece we'll be talking about today, where we're accessing low temperature, sort of just the ground everywhere beneath your feet. Doesn't need to be hot rock in particular to do heating and cooling of buildings. So why geothermal heat pumps? Dandelion as a company was founded very much to deal with this yellow highlighted box piece of our national carbon emissions. So the commercial and residential buildings piece of what the greenhouse gas emissions are that we're putting up into the atmosphere. Geothermal heat pumps can be very low carbon or even zero carbon with a completely clean electricity source powering the heat pumps. They offer the lowest operating costs of any heating and cooling system technology. And there's no need for fossil backup or dual fuel systems with geothermal heat pumps. So what are geothermal heat pumps? So as I mentioned, Dandelion Energy is a residential installer. So this graphic here is a picture of a home, but you also can install this type of equipment in large commercial buildings. So for our systems, we're looking at generally installing into existing homes. Retrofits is almost all of our market today. And so we're working with homeowners who have, in most cases, existing central ductwork. So they're getting their heating and often air conditioning through a central ductwork system. And what we're doing is coming in and installing a ground loop on their property. And then we are installing a heat pump to replace their furnace and connecting that heat pump up to the existing ductwork. And that ductwork in this case is that distribution system. Again, a larger commercial building, that distribution system can be more complicated. And there are forms of geothermal heat pumps that are water to water. So you have your water running through your ground loop, or a fluid that's water with some other things mixed in. We use propylene glycol, which is a food safe antifreeze, along with water in that ground loop, but different installers use different materials. And so you can have a water to air, which is what this system is, ground loop water to home air distribution through central ductwork. You can also install water to water ground source heat pumps. So while we don't do those, others do, and that way you can get hydronic heating in the home. There are also central VRF systems. So in that case, you've got a ground loop and then a central heat pump that is using refrigerant lines to go to wall units in each room. And in that case, the heat pumps in the room, the distribution units in the room can look much like the inside part of an air source heat pump. So our installation process, as I mentioned, involves drilling to put a ground loop in the customer's property. Generally, we can go in a backyard, front yard, side yard. In some cases, we've picked up part of the driveway, put the ground loop in, and put the driveway back down over it. So we're really focused on getting into all different types of neighborhoods and homes. Then you're trenching to connect the top of that vertical ground loop to the home, and then the heat pump installation. So what makes Dandelion different? We have really entered the market as a sort of full service, integrated soup to nuts, start to finish for the customer. And then once their whole system is up and running, we also provide long-term support to them. We are working with smaller rigs that allow us to work in very tight suburban lots, as you can see in this picture with a side lot install. We have pretty sophisticated software that we can sort of consider market standard for designing the system so that you get exactly the right ground loop for your needs in your home. And then lots of process innovation. So our field ops teams, we have about 200 people who are in our field operations today in our current market, and they are constantly innovating to try to bring down the costs and improve the way that we can get system performance with the sort of fastest, most efficient installs. We also offer financing to customers, and this is a really important piece of making sure that customers can pay for that upfront installation, which is more expensive with a geothermal heat pump, and then pay off that loan with their annual savings because their ongoing energy bills are so much less. So we use that savings going forward to pay off a loan for the ground loop. So a little bit more on the benefits. These specifics in these graphs are based on an analysis we did in Colorado. So would be different in some of the different Western states, but just as an example, we saw a 35% reduction in annual heating and cooling costs with a Dandelion geothermal system for customers coming off of natural gas in Colorado. The carbon dioxide impacts are pretty amazing. You can see decreases depending on how clean your electricity on your grid is. You could see a complete reduction and have no more emissions, or you can see 75%, 50%, huge reductions in emissions, depending on which fuel people are coming off of. And then we also see a really impressive performance compared with air source heat pumps. So in general, you'll see geo systems using about half of the electricity on an annual basis that an air source heat pump system would use for the same home. That means about half the electricity bills over the course of the year for the homeowner or resident. And then peak electricity usage is also significantly lower for ground source. And that's because of accessing the ground as a heat source or sink. And so that's really important for the overall grid management and how many renewables we need to build out in order to power fully electrified heating and transportation. There was an analysis in New York State of the benefits of that, the grid benefit. And so for every geothermal system that a homeowner installs, they are sort of subsidizing $7,000 worth of grid services to the overall grid in New York. One more very important one I mentioned earlier, but because the performance of a ground source heat pump system really doesn't decrease at lower outdoor air temperatures the way that air source heat pumps do, you don't need fossil fuel backup, you don't need dual fuel systems, you just need to use the ground and a fairly low amount of electricity to move the heat back and forth from the ground to the home. So in terms of the Western governors and the policy priorities from our perspective, where we sit as a company, as I mentioned, geothermal heat pumps provide the lowest life cycle costs, but they do require an upfront investment. And Certainly, the federal government made a huge step forward with extending the federal tax credit for individuals who install home geothermal heating and cooling can get 30% back on their income tax credits, and they can carry that forward over a few years if they need to. There are also a new set of federal rebates created in the Inflation Reduction Act. And so everything that we can do to make sure that those stay in place and don't become some sort of chit in the negotiations over the debt ceiling for the next few months would be really critical to making sure that residents throughout the West can take advantage of geothermal heating and cooling and bring their costs and emissions down. And then similarly, oops, I have two number ones. The second one should be number two, that on the more home front, rather than what the feds could do, is just looking at, for member states and territories, establishing tax credits, establishing energy efficiency rebates, where we have seen market transformation and geothermal heating and cooling really ramp up exponentially in the Northeast has been because of energy efficiency rebates that are completely justified by energy savings be put into place. And the reason they don't exist in a lot of territories today is just because it's such a niche product today that there hasn't seemed to be a mass market desire for it. So it's if you build it, they will come. If you create the rebates, we definitely now have business models for companies that can come in and provide this as a benefit for local customers. So here's my contact information. I'm happy to be in touch with anyone and everyone if there are questions you have that don't get answered over the course of the webinar. And thanks again for the opportunity to participate today.
Absolutely. And thank you, Heather, for joining us today. I will say the one complaint I have about the tax credit from the IRA is that it does not include geothermal heated jacuzzis. So I will save that complaint for another time. But we're going to be moving on to our next presenter, Jeff Hammond, the Executive Director of IGSPA. Jeff, can you tell us a little bit about IGSPA and what you guys are working on?
Certainly, and thank you for the opportunity to talk about IGSPA. IGSPA has been around for a long time. It's an acronym that some people have difficulty pronouncing, so we go by International Ground Source Heat Pump Association, or IGSPA, whichever you prefer. But it's been around since 1987, initially part of Oklahoma State University, even though a lot of the early research was started in the 70s. Oklahoma State did a lot of the ground heat exchanger algorithms and calculations, along with early training materials and manuals and so forth. Since the end of 2020, IGSPA has become an independent nonprofit, and so now we're able to do some things that allow the organization to grow even further. We're proud to have almost 800 individual members and 118 business and corporate members. We represent 10 countries, so it's truly an international organization, and pleased to be able to give you some updates on IGSPA. To give you an idea of what IGSPA is, our mission is to promote a unified effort to encourage the adoption of geothermal by increasing understanding, awareness, and adoption through education and training, standards development, promotion of the technology, facilitating cooperation between stakeholders and other organizations, and providing a resource for technical and application information. So we focus on the education and standards portion of it, but we're sort of the technical resource for the industry. And that's the ground source technology is really our whole mission, promoting the technology and helping with understanding. You'll hear from Ryan Dougherty shortly. Our sister organization, GeoExchange organization, works hand in hand with IGSPA. And as you can see from this Venn diagram, Geo concentrates more on advocacy and utility engagement, voice of the industry type topics, where we concentrate, as I mentioned earlier, on training, education, standards, and so forth. We meet in the middle with really the industry promotion, where we're working on workforce development. That's a high priority of ours right now. And as we work together to promote the industry, we're trying to make sure that we're educating everyone on the benefits of geothermal and how that might help in Western states in particular. So one of the things that we have to clear up, Heather had a great slide on geothermal earlier. Sometimes we get confused with other technologies. We love all these technologies, geothermal power as well as ground source heat pumps, but we're actually the less deep of the two technologies, sometimes called low temperature or shallow geothermal versus the high temperature or deep geothermal. They're both great technologies and contribute to decarbonization, but you can't see ours usually. Ours is buried and it's dedicated to heating and cooling systems. So just to clear that up, that's our concentration really. Even though both technologies are great, we're concentrating on what you can't see, which can be a challenge because you can't see what's happening underground. To help with the education side of it, IGSPA has a number of courses that we offer. And from a workforce development standpoint, these help contractors, distributors, engineers design the systems right. As we grow as an industry, that's very important that we have this education. So our most popular training is called the accredited installer training. It really concentrates on residential and light commercial applications. And it's a pretty comprehensive training program that goes through design, installation, and covers the ground heat exchanger in a lot of detail. Our certified residential designer course is similar to accredited installer, but it really just focuses on the design, whereas the installer course talks about the outside portion and installation, startup, so forth. We have a very popular commercial course called Certified GeoExchange Designer, and that really is focused for engineers and designers for larger commercial type applications, as is the certified or the geothermal inspector course that's concentrated towards commercial and has to do with the project management so that we have a good quality installation. So those are all available today, as well as the train the trainer as we bring new trainers into this industry. We're developing some additional courses, and this will give you an idea of what might happen with those new courses. Excuse me. We're focusing on workforce development. These are all the jobs that are created in this industry. And one of the areas where we could use some help from the Western Governors Association is promotion and funding of these new careers. There's so much opportunity for job creation in our industry. You can see all these jobs listed. And as we start to change our training programs, we're going to be focusing more on these individual jobs. These job titles were created from a DOE report about 10 years ago. And they have really a lot of detail on what each job entails. And so we're going to focus on those as we develop our new training. There are a lot of resources available. If you go to IGSPA's website, you'll find manuals both in print form as well as digital form. And so from a usability standpoint, we really like the digital manuals. They're searchable and easy to find that information. So that's all available on the website. IGSPA also is participating in our binational standard, which focuses on design and installation of systems for both residential and commercial. And that's a really important piece of the industry as we grow, because consistency of design and installation is crucial to quality installations. So that's a great resource if you're looking for guidance on design and installation. Some current projects that may help in decisions that the Western Governors Association is looking at. As I mentioned earlier, we're really concentrated on workforce development. And what that means is a modular approach. So where we have those courses I mentioned earlier, those are being broken up into smaller modules geared towards job descriptions. I think as the industry grows, our jobs are going to be much more specialized. So in the past, where one person might do most of the job or two people might do most of the job, especially on a residential application, as we get into these larger systems and district or thermal energy networks, now we'll have people that are dedicated just to one particular aspect. So we need training that focuses on not only bringing our current HVAC and driller and ground heat exchanger contractors into the industry as we grow, but also bringing in new people for these jobs that are being created. So that's a big project. These will be in-person, virtual, and online training options, and with digital materials. Another big project that we're working on is our annual conference. If you'd like to learn a lot more about this industry, we'll be in Vegas December 5th through the 7th. And we're still looking for speakers if you're interested in speaking at the conference. But you'll find people from all over the world at that conference, and we're also working with the National Groundwater Association for this conference. So there'll be a lot of drillers in place if you have questions about our industry. We're also working on our public website and our member portal. So watch for that. If you haven't been to IGSPA.org, you'll find a lot of really good information. And that's just a quick overview of IGSPA, and I'll be around for questions later on. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Absolutely. And thank you for joining us, Jeff. On to our next guest, we have Ryan from GeoExchange. Ryan, I saw a Venn diagram about IGSPA and GeoExchange, how you guys kind of overlap. What makes GeoExchange and what you guys are working on a bit different from IGSPA?
Thanks, Stephen. It's great to be here today. Yeah, we are sort of the yin to IGSPA's yang. Nary a day goes by where Jeff and I are not on the line together, talking about coordinating our activities. We're focused on the same ultimate goal, which is really expanding the market for geothermal heating and cooling, making this wonderful technology much more prevalent and easily accessible within the marketplace. But our focuses are a little bit different, and I'll talk about that in my remarks and get into some of the trends and other advancements in the technology. So we are a public policy and advocacy organization. For many years now, our primary focus has been on Washington, D.C., on federal policy, and we've had some recent success there, which I'll get into in a moment. But we're also focused on public engagement and raising consumer awareness. It's just a sort of a sad fact that we have been historically a niche technology that not a lot of people know about. And when you talk to sort of John Q. consumer and ask him or her, what do you think about geothermal? Often they'll say, well, I went to Iceland once on a vacation and I'm very impressed by it. So we need to raise awareness about what geothermal heating and cooling is, what it isn't, and what it can do for folks. We're also very focused on building partnerships, and it's great to see some frequent collaborators, Dandelion Energy and Major Geothermal, on the line today. I mentioned some recent success, and this is an image of President Joe Biden signing into law the Inflation Reduction Act. It was announced as a sort of a shock to the system in Washington, although a lot of groundwork had gone into the making of this momentous and historic legislation. Shortly after he took office, President Biden stated pretty emphatically that he was going to be the climate president. And throughout 2021 and into 2022, there were a number of negotiations ongoing in Washington, D.C. around a reconciliation package that would have a large number of clean energy and environmentally focused provisions within the bill. At a certain point, it was declared dead. A number of the key votes had walked away from negotiations, but it rose from the dead, and to the amazement of pretty much any insider in Washington, D.C., it was reintroduced as the Inflation Reduction Act, and really the rest is history. It passed very quickly and is now law. And a lot of steps are being taken to implement this historic law, which is frankly the most impactful, strongest legislation that has ever been passed in America, or really the history of the world, when it comes to the climate fight and addressing the challenge that is ahead of us as it relates to climate change. So what is in the law? I'll just touch kind of quickly. It would take a couple hours in a webinar to go through all of the great provisions that are in this legislation, in this law. But just a quick overview, there are credits for residential homeowners, and Heather mentioned this. You can get up to 30% of the total installed cost for a geothermal heating and cooling system back from the feds in the form of a tax credit. You can carry that forward if you don't have enough existing liability. You can carry that credit forward for up to 10 years. There are also residential credits for other home improvements, not just for geothermal. So you could do, efficiency improvements. You could do, insulation and other things like that to improve the efficiency of your home. There's money there for that. Heather also mentioned the rebate funds that are coming down the pike. These are going to be administered by the state energy offices. I'm keep hearing that they'll be live later this year, but that remains to be seen. There's a lot to be sorted out on the home efficiency rebate programs, but they are coming, and that's something that could be stacked with those credits. On the commercial side of the scale, there are significant changes to the existing or the previously existing commercial tax credits for geothermal systems. They had previously been 10% of total system cost. That's been bumped up to 30% now. And there are a couple categories of additional bonus credits. So you could ostensibly get up to 50%. If the component parts of your system are comprised of, they're manufactured here in the United States, and the system is comprised of a majority of domestically produced parts, you can get an extra 10%. And then if you're in an energy community, you can get an extra 10%, taking it to 50% of the total installed cost. What is an energy community? There's a number of criteria that designate what an energy community is. If a community has been involved in extractive industries, most significantly coal mining, if there was a coal-fired power plant that may have shuttered not too long ago, if there are certain levels of unemployment. And there's recently been guidance issued from the Treasury Department around what an energy community is. If you look at a map, it's great swaths of the Western United States. So there's another opportunity there for many, many communities in the United States to get an additional credit for the installation of geothermal heat pump systems in a commercial application. A really big change to the investment tax credit, the commercial credits in the law. Now nonprofits and states and cities and tribal governments, they are all eligible to receive direct payments from the federal government for adopting geothermal heat pumps. Previously, that you had to have a tax appetite, or you had to have existing tax liability to take a credit against that liability. Now, if you're a nonprofit unit of government, you can just ask for that 30, 40, even 50% to be sent directly to you. Some other good stuff in the law I'm going to gloss over in the interest of time. I should note, though, that there is forthcoming guidance. We're working very closely with the White House executive agencies to ensure that the way they put all this stuff into place is done correctly, that it adequately contemplates the intricacies and the unique characteristics of geothermal heat pump technology. And so there's more to come. There should be more information very soon about domestic content bonus credits. And then probably by the end of June, we should know more about direct payment for nonprofits. Geothermal heat pumps, they've been around a very long time, but they've come quite a long ways in recent years. Many of the systems now have remote diagnostics. They're measuring and monitoring their performance frequently. This is a platform from one manufacturer called the Symphony Insight system. All of the dots on this map represent geothermal heat pump systems, and they're connected to the internet. They're monitored around the clock in 10-second intervals. And you can see this is an aggregate of all of those units and what their average heating and cooling cost is over the course of a year. $700. That's not a lot. These folks, these households are paying on average about $60 a month for heating and cooling. I mentioned consumer awareness earlier. We've got a lot of work to do here, but we not long ago produced some very humorous advertising spots around geothermal. The two folks you see on the screen here could not be more dissimilar. One's a dyed-in-the-wool tree hugger, is all about saving planet Earth and averting the climate crisis. The guy on the left doesn't care so much, but he loves geothermal heating and cooling because it saves him a lot of money. Regardless of your political ideology, you can find something to love in geothermal. Urge you to go check out these videos, Geothermal for All on YouTube or at geothermalforall.com. There is a growing movement afoot in campus and district geothermal. All of these logos that are connected to a geographic location, there's some big names in the world of academia and American corporations. What they have in common is that they are all undertaking an effort to interconnect buildings on their campuses with geothermal heating and cooling systems. And if you think about it, you start to connect buildings together. They have different load profiles. They have different sort of heating and cooling needs throughout the day, throughout a year. You can start to just shift thermal energy around in a circuit and achieve very, very high levels of efficiency. In fact, Colorado Mesa University in Grand Junction is a real leader and a pioneer in this approach, and was the focus of some previous Western Governors Association activity. I know that the group did a field trip there not too long ago. Just like there are many campuses that are going geothermal, there are a number of all geothermal communities that are springing up around the country. It makes a tremendous amount of sense when you think about it. Why build a new subdivision and run gas pipes to it when you may have to be off that gas at a certain date in the future, in the not too distant future? By going all geothermal, you're ensuring a lot of stability and predictability in the community. One all geothermal community is Whisper Valley down in Austin, Texas. And I just want to talk very briefly about resiliency. In February of 2021, the central US experienced a polar vortex that was unprecedented in many respects. Whisper Valley down in Austin, while many of their neighbors were blacked out during some of the coldest parts of the winter, they sailed through this extreme weather event in comfort with just a little bit, small amount of time where they had to lose their power. The reason is because geothermal heating and cooling systems need such limited amounts of electricity to operate, even in periods of extreme weather conditions. Could be a heat wave, could be a polar vortex. Beneath the earth, just a few feet down, there's a fairly constant temperature. There's so much more I could say, but in the interest of time, I'll end there. Want to kick it back to you, Stephen, and happy to answer any questions in the Q&A portion.
Thank you very much, Ryan. And for this last presentation, I will go ahead and share my screen. And Terry from Major Geothermal, and Terry, just let me know when you want to go to the next slide.
This little brief presentation is actually going to focus on what you get after you get a system installed, and we're also going to give an idea of the flexibility of these systems for the types of applications. Next slide, please. So just some key considerations, not trying to go techno on everyone, but we can't rule of thumb the design and installation of these systems. We actually have to start with a heating and cooling load calculation, whether it's residential or commercial. Then we let the site help determine if we're going to go with a closed loop system or an open loop system or some combination thereof. The technology is actually fairly simple, but it doesn't suffer assumptions, and you have to dot your I's and cross your T's to make these things work right. And the final statement on this slide is these systems can be installed just about anywhere in any climate, any location, any geology. We just have to account for all the variables. Next slide, please. So we're going to look at some examples and even show some operating costs. Next. So this example of a residential installation, 1995, a 3,200 square foot home. There's no backup heat on this thing. And the house for 6 years never broke $325 a year. And we had the unit sub-metered, so we know exactly what that cost was. And the reason I'm so familiar with it, that was my house. My ex-wife loves it. Next slide, please. So this is for an extreme microclimate in Colorado, the Gunnison Basin of Colorado. And we'll talk about real briefly its climate conditions. But this house was about 3,600 square feet, radiant floor heat only. And what's impressive about this, we sub-metered this heat pump way back in the day. And the owner has yet to break $250 a year to heat the house in Gunnison, Colorado. And there is no backup heat on this system, and it's very comfortable. Next slide, please. The reason this is significant, the Gunnison Basin, the average temperature, including summer temperatures, is 35 degrees. Their lowest recorded temperature in the winter is 47 below. They actually hit 30 below this last winter. So it is not a very warm place. Next slide, please. We've had very good success in the Gunnison Basin. In fact, the county uses a lot of ground source heat pump systems, and there's this courthouse built in 2015 has a closed loop system, and it has a backup boiler, but the backup boiler has never been used. Next slide. So what's impressive about this is John Cattles, the assistant county manager, has been tracking utility costs. They're down to 38 cents per square foot per year on a 42,000 square foot building. Now that includes not just HVAC, space conditioning, but also lights and all plug loads. So this is a very efficient building, and they attribute it largely to the ground source heat pump system. Next slide, please. So continuing with Gunnison, the reason I'm using this, we read the Gunnison examples. We've just did a series with more detail on these projects, but this is a 26,000 square foot retrofit, and it's got a vertical ground loop installation. It's called the Blackstock building. Next slide. So their actual operating costs, they've gone from $1.11 per square foot per year to 58 cents per square foot per year. And as the county has noted, their maintenance is lower, their comfort's better, and they've got resilience and reliability with their system that they did not have before. And as John has told me, since he gets complaints from the employees if they're not comfortable, and he doesn't get those complaints anymore, he's actually a very well-liked man now. Next, please. So right next door is the Health and Human Services building. That was a retrofit in 2018, 12,000 square foot home. Next slide. And John's done a little bit more of a detailed analysis here. So you can see on the right, on 2018, 2020, they just continually drop their power consumption and their CO2 emissions. So they're very, very happy with their ground source heat pump systems. Next. This is their new library, about 15,000 square feet, just recently completed. Next slide. And the photo on the left side of the slide is where the header piping comes in from the ground loop, which is all installed underneath the parking lot. Next slide. And what's impressive is from Drew Brookhart, the director for Gunnison County Libraries, this past winter, they've yet to break $100 a month utility bills to heat, cool, and light their library. So to say they're happy with it is an understatement. And by the way, I wished all of our installations looked this pretty. Next, please. Gunnison County, their new renovation on the airport terminal was just completed. It's 42,000 square feet. Next slide, please. And they're down to they initially thought they were going to be at $70,000 a year for all loads, elevators, HVAC, everything. What they're finding out is they're down to $800 per 1,000 square foot per year, or 80 cents per square foot per year actual cost. And by the way, this system has no backup boiler. It is 100% driven by its ground loop. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to give a little more scope of in the Western US what some recent projects at Montana State University. They are going to a district loop system. By the way, it'll be one of the, once they get that up and rolling, their district loop system in Bozeman at MSU will probably be one of the largest in the Western US, but that's just in concept right now. In the meantime, they've been very successful with the American Indian Hall, the Norm Asbjornson Hall of Engineering, and the Romney Hall, which is also in the historic registry for the state of Montana. In progress is a 600,000 square foot retrofit for the United States Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs. Its design is almost complete. It's just going through other budget analysis, that sort of thing, but it's coming. And then the Moby Arena in Fort Collins is a 300,000 square foot retrofit. It's up and running and working. Next slide, please. And then in Fremont, California, the Delta Americas headquarters, which is about 150,000 square foot. It's not only LEED Platinum, but is also net zero. And it relies on a horizontally drilled ground heat exchanger. And then just for abrupt change in pace, the Grace Church in Basalt, Colorado has a horizontally excavated ground loop. And I just wanted to show the options, what we can do depending on what the site provides us as an industry that we can take advantage of. Next slide, please. Some comments. I work in a lot of different states designing these systems, and I've run into some states that have regulations that really inhibit the installation of ground source heat pump systems. And a lot of times the regulations are really senseless. They do nothing to protect the environment, and in fact, they hinder the installation of a lot of ground source heat pump systems with unnecessary costs, and they're no benefit to anyone, whether it's the environment, the end user, or anyone else. One of the things I have a problem with incentives is that most of them have no validation requirements to prove that the system is working. And we can speak to that because we do a lot of forensics and construction defect litigation on poorly designed systems. It's not that people set out to design and install a bad system. They just don't know what they need to know. So if future incentives are being considered, I would appreciate those that bestow the incentives to put in some requirements to prove that the systems are working the way they were supposed to. And our current federal incentives that were just passed, we're still waiting on the paperwork. I know that's in progress, but we still have a lot of end users that would like to start filling out the forms to take advantage of those incentives. Next. And I appreciate it.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Terry. And that concludes our presentations for now. We'll head into the Q&A section. And I did actually want to start off with a question for myself. And Ryan, we were talking earlier about licensing and how that might actually cause some trouble with companies being able to operate across the nation. Is there a federal approach that might be able to help, a federal approach that might be able to give guidelines to licensing requirements and maybe some standardization across the board?
Thanks, Stephen. So really licensure is generally the for HVAC installers, and I would, Heather, feel free to chime in because I know this is something near and dear to your heart, but you've been talking about it enough lately that I've taken it up as a cause in my own right. Generally, it's something that is left to the jurisdiction of state licensing bodies, and so it would be. I think that there's an opportunity that we ought to pursue some sort of federal action on state licensure. But this is really a fight that is being engaged at the state level right now. Heather, I know you've done a lot of work on this already, so I'm sure you have some thoughts on some of the complexities around licensing and some of the deficiencies when it comes, or the impediments to market growth and development when it comes to HVAC licensing.
Yes, and I have to just preface that I don't know the situation with licensing in the Western states. We're currently operating in the Northeast US, primarily plan to expand to Colorado later this year. But the licensing issues we're running into have really created huge bottlenecks and barriers to our expansion. There are multiple states we would be operating in today, except that the state-based licensing makes it extremely difficult for licensed contractors to work across state lines. So it's just an economic barrier to growth, and one that we hope that states will do more to be reciprocal and recognize each other's licensing, so that electricians and plumbers and drillers and HVAC installers, all our licensed tradespeople can have more flexibility, and companies can grow and work in more places.
And Jeff, it sounds like ICSPA might be doing some work to at least give guidance on what those roles should be and the requirements for their education is. Is that correct?
It is correct. Yeah, workforce development's a big part of our future plans, and also standardization, with the binational standard and consistency that helps provide guidance as well. So definitely on our radar.
And that's interesting to me about the standardization, because the other question I had was that I know in the solar industry, there's a lot of concern around tariffs impacting the supply chain. Is the ground source heat pump experiencing any similar issues around tariffs or supply chains that could be addressed at the federal level?
Not on the tariff side. I should have said earlier, this is really truly thoroughly an American industry. I talked a little bit about domestic content and the bonus credit for commercial system installations. But having polled some of our member manufacturers, there's going to be no problem with them meeting those domestic content thresholds, because the majority of their component parts are sourced domestically. Certainly some circuitry and other components come from foreign countries, but most components are from the United States, and then the products themselves are all assembled in the United States. Generally, you're using high density polyethylene piping to connect the geothermal heat pump to the earth. All of that HDPE pipe is manufactured here in the United States. So tariffs are not so much of an issue. On the supply chain side, certainly through the pandemic, the industry had a lot of fits and starts with trying to source different component parts. A lot of that has been smoothed out now, but there is an opportunity to, and the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, does have a number of provisions that seeks to sort of bring more manufacturing back onshore. So I think we're going to see more and more component parts that are able to be sourced domestically, which will just make any supply chain complexity that much easier to overcome.
That's great to hear. Talking about the Inflation Reduction Act, I have one question before we go to one more question before we go to the audience. I know there are concerns about the rollout and the timeliness of that. Terry and Ryan, you both touched base on that, getting the IRS to get documentation out. But also you mentioned the concerns around 1 megawatt thermal capacity calculation. Is there any preference from the industry there right now that's kind of overwhelmingly favorable that you guys are looking at, or do you guys have any guidelines on what you guys would like to see on that?
Yes, in November of last year, in response to a request for comment from the Treasury Department, we submitted what we believe is a pretty straightforward, but elegant and scientifically based approach on how to calculate net thermal output in a distributed heat pump system. Not in a distributed heat pump system, not all units are going to be working at max capacity at any one time. So you have to apply a diversity factor to account for the building type. And we've done that using models from the Department of Energy and the American Society of Heating, Refrigeration, and Air Conditioning Engineers. And so using those tools, we came up with a capacity of 445 tons, which is a sort of a sizing metric for geothermal heat pumps. And we keep asking them to validate our proposal. They're very, very busy. On some of the other guidance, like domestic content and direct pay, we have it on good faith and good intel that it's coming soon. What does soon mean when you're dealing with the federal government? Well, a couple months, I'm told. So I'm banking on that, and I hope we don't slip to July without that direct pay guidance. But it should be in the next couple months.
Understood. So I'll jump to the audience questions. I'm sorry if we aren't able to get through all of them. Nicholas asked, developing industrial residential buildings in Arkansas and Texas, how can I plan and cost out geothermal systems with standard city utility backups and solar? That might be a question for Terry. I know that one's a bit technical. I will remind I am a policy wonk. So Terry, do you have an answer to that question?
Yes, it depends because there's so many variables involved with that. The only thing I can recommend is you need to get aligned with an experienced designer, mechanical engineer, contractor, and to work out all the variables. There's just too much to consider to answer in that question in such a short time.
And I'll ask Jeff, you do provide educational opportunities through IGSPA. Is there a way that somebody can find a provider that has taken your course or that you guys have certified?
Yes, we have a directory on the website at igspa.org. So when you go to the business directory, you'll find two different types of searches. One is for business and corporate members, and the other is for certified individuals. So if you go to the certified individuals, you can find a person in your state who might be helpful. And from my experience, our industry is very friendly in that aspect, and I'm sure you would find support in those types of resources.
Awesome. And I will go ahead and name drop Dandelion Energy and Major Geothermal because they're joining us here today. They can obviously reach out to Heather or Terry if you have any questions for them as well. I had a question. This is an application that I absolutely love, and I've been talking for about a while because I live here in Colorado, but building on the driveway snowmelt application question, are there any commercial sized snowmelt operations anyone might be aware of? Colorado ski areas are really looking for a clean solution. Is anybody aware of any current projects? I know Gunnison, Colorado is up in the mountain area, but are there any commercial operations the size for the Colorado ski areas?
I can probably take that question. This is Terry. Are you talking specifically about snowmelt?
Yes.
Okay. The problem with snowmelt is we cannot make a judgment call on the number of events per year, their duration, and their intensity. So ground source heat pump applications, with some exceptions, are typically not a good fit for snowmelt. The other thing is you have a much higher peak load for a snowmelt surface area. So if you've got a 5,000 square foot driveway that wants to be snow melted, you might have to bomb the entire town of Vale, if that's where it was located, with ground loop, and you still may not have enough ground loop capacity to make that happen. So the exception to that would be if it was a commercial project where you had a lot of heat rejection, even in the middle of winter, and you're looking for a place to put that heat. Well, then we can use a snowmelt slab as an auxiliary heat rejection device with no moving parts. And we have done that, and that works very well.
Thank you, Terry. And I'm going to take one last question from Victor. Victor asked, which offices does IGSPA and GeoExchange work with for clarifications on implementing of the IRA and related federal incentives? Do you have guidance on applying credits to full mechanical systems and structural if applying the pile system if a system is based on 75% or more geo?
So we have been engaged with the Treasury Department, the Department of Energy, their Office of Policy, the White House, members of Congress, and probably a handful of other entities on weighing in on this issue. Victor, there is a firm, the Energy Tax Savers out of Boston. They have a partner, Jacob Goldman, who has a great deal of expertise in just in the area around the question that you're asking about, the sort of 75% threshold. ETS is really the foremost expert in terms of a legal firm that's focusing on these issues. And I would highly recommend you reach out to Mr. Goldman, who might be able to help with that.
Wonderful. Thank you, Ryan. And I'm sorry to the audience, but I am going to have to cut off the Q&A at this point in time, just to being conscious of our guests' schedule. But I would like to thank our participants in today's webinar, and thank you to WGA's chairman, Governor Jared Polis, for his support in this initiative. If you have been following us through the Heat Beneath Our Feet initiative, you'll know that we will be releasing a final report in June with recommendations on how to spur the development and deployment of geothermal resources, some of which we saw today. This will be in conjunction with WGA's annual meeting on June 26th through 28th in Boulder, Colorado. You can visit westgov.org to find out more information about our annual meeting and how you can attend. Once again, I would like to thank our sponsors for their contributions to our work on this initiative. Without them, our work really would not be possible. Thank you again for joining us today, and I look forward to seeing many of you in Boulder, Colorado for our annual meeting. Have a good one.